Welcome to the fourth real version of Rural Community Food System Chaos in Action. I have several items I'd like to talk about on the agenda today, though I have no problems someone else bringing up items first if there are certain aspects of this chaotic undertaking you'd like to offer thoughts about. Don't all jump in at once, but you're all welcome.
Okay, for myself, at some point in time, I'd like to go over some of the, you may be doing this already yourself, but the mapping issues, talking about why links are going certain places, talk about other things to deal with the map itself, and not so much the policy or philosophical stuff.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Brian. And since I have fixed the recording on my end, so I now have this little rectangular bar that tells me who's talking, but it doesn't show up in the video. If you're going to offer a comment, it's probably good if you let us know who you are, so that the other people who or others who watch the video in the future might get a sense of who's actually offering the comments. The problem is that when it records the videos, or the images of the people on the right-hand side, well, right or left or wherever I end up putting it, it actually detracts from the size of the viewable image in the video, and it's already kind of small to get a handle on things anyway. So that was Brian. Anyone else?
Yes, I've been wondering about the addition of a precipitating event in history. My research as a farm kid in a context that grew up to be industrial found that in 1970, Richard Nixon got as his Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz, who had been an advocate of bigger farming. And Nixon did a grain deal with the USSR, and the Russians bought more grain than was anticipated, which really upset the apple cart and gave American grain farmers, hey, let's go. But it pitted American farmers who had bought American grain against, so there was a division. Dairy, beef, hog, chicken, whatever, against grain. And I suspect at that point the use of the size of farms grew dramatically. The use of pesticides, herbicides, and petroleum-based fertilizers took a big jump on the curve. Where does something like that belong in our model? Because it threw whatever stability might have been in place to the wind.
Well, that sounds like a good question.
It is a good question.
I don't have an easy answer for it, but
Sure.
we'll put it on the list.
The same source advocated that to somehow give land to small young farmers, and it might not be the best prime land, but to give small young farmers who want to try organic, no pesticide, no herbicide, and maybe some sort of an innovative crop would be a way to return the system to some sort of vitality, we'll say.
Okay.
Provide that article for us?
Sure.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead and post it in the references group, there's a lot there at the moment. Just go ahead and add one more. All right. Other thoughts? Okay, fasten your seatbelts. So what I have spent the majority of the time between the last session and this session doing is trying to figure out how someone actually comprehends this piece of chaos that we have created. The first question is, I think we sorted out what it was that we were creating in terms of the statement here is been rehashed several times and seems to be agreed upon. The question then is what we are currently mapping, the current system, the desired system, or some amalgamation of the two of them that confuses things to no end? I think we're confused. Hold on a second. Where's my mic? Sorry, my throat is really acting up today. I think it's appropriate to map the current system so you know or get a sense of what's going on, and you then use that to map or add the appropriate relationships that take you to the system that you would prefer to be. I don't know if I shared this with you, but I ran into this project that was done by some people in Raleigh, which had to do with high levels of trauma, adverse childhood experiences among families in East Harbor, which is a city in North Carolina. And these, I think they're students, created this map. And they did a marvelous job of creating it. And I talked to them, and I told them that I thought it was a marvelous map. And then I looked at the rest of it and said, oh my God. So not only did they create this map, they then said, okay, what is the strategic intent? And they have gone ahead and mapped into this places that they are looking at pursuing different things. Here's the punishment and building and support and healthy relationships, and all right. And they identified a set of leverage indicators, which are aspects of that particular entity, looking at the potential for change. And then they also looked at what their leverage hypothesis was in terms of aspects of the model that needed to change. And I just thought this was all marvelous, and I have another meeting with them next week, because I thought it's one of the best examples that I've found of someone actually mapping the current system and then figuring out what it was that they wanted to do with it. Comments to this point?
Very good.
Yeah, I had a look at this before joining this session. I looked only at the first map, and I also read your comment, Jean, and the problem for me is always the same, which is how to unfold, how to explain, how to convey such complex messages that contain such a large and complex number of relationships. So it's the way in which these maps are explained to others that concerns me. It's not easy to get in the head of the people, of the team that produced this map, because it's too much, it's overwhelming. It's so the unfolding aspect that you have mentioned many times, in my opinion, is still one of the key challenges.
But Gene, you provided some bells and whistles to help with that, didn't you?
Well, I've provided some bells and whistles to help with that, though the bells and whistles that I've provided to help with that to this point are actually terrible. And I have spent the last 3 days intently figuring out how to reduce the complexity of those bells and whistles in terms of I had previously talked about doing partial views to aid with the unfolding, and those partial views took an unbelievable amount of coding behind the scenes that you couldn't ask any collaborator who hadn't spent a year with Kumu to get involved in doing. Though I think I cracked the code on it a few days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, so that the unfolding becomes automatic when you create the loops. So rather than all of this being unique coding every time you add a loop, I've now figured out how to make it automatic, and I've done it in that many statements right there. So that it does a showcase based upon loops, and it uses the labels so that when you click on these, it walks you through. The key is you have to label the loops appropriately. So notice that now the loops are 04R, 05R. So rather than having the loop indicator at the end, it's at the beginning. And I also added some other unique stuff to go with popovers. What is that? It's not supposed to be there. Oh, it's not there. Sorry. Excuse me while I don't know what I'm doing. So once I do this, I can go ahead and then expand it and just look at that piece. And I also fixed the popovers so that rather than having to write a brief description of that entity, whether it be an element, a connection, or a loop, it simply presents a shortened version of whatever the actual description is, because you don't want this popover description to fill up the whole screen, and it has a scroll bar so that you can read through it here. So you can actually put this away. You don't need this anymore. And you can look at the different pieces, and then you can say, okay, let me go to the next piece. Let me focus that. Now this is, all right, 7R. I can look at what that structure is designed to be. It's difficult to read them in the context of the whole project, but it's better because the loops and the descriptions now show up, even though the whole thing isn't expanded. When you mouse over it, you can in fact see the whole part. And if you decide that you want, suppose I want to look at education. Sorry, this keeps happening because I'm not clicking in the right place. But suppose I wanted to look at education. I could then go ahead and focus on education. That shows me just the things that connect to education, the things that influence it, and the things it influences. And I could spend my time thinking about, are there other things, excuse me, that I want to, that should influence education that aren't here? And then I can ask myself, are they somewhere else? All right, I can look to see if there are other things that ought to be there by doing searches. Now, I will admit that I don't have this figured out in terms of it needs to get, sorry, hold on. I think I have a spider building a web in my throat. it needs to get sorted out to an extent where a person could find this project on the web and have some sense of how to participate in this project, which means they need a guidebook or a map for how to navigate the jungle. So what I'm currently creating, based upon my current limited understanding, is a Kumu Collaborate playlist, which will in fact encompass a number of videos that people can watch that will say, here's what we currently understand about how to come across a project that was done using the Systems Wiki template in an organizational account that employs comments and participants, so that a person can actually become a member as an observer or a contributor to this project and interact and continue to evolve it. And as I said, I am getting closer to understanding this, but I don't quite have it yet. Comments? Oh, and I muted everybody because of the background noise.
Yes. I mentioned what I did at the start because it seemed to me that a way to start a project like this with as many capable people as you are is to decide on a few circumstances that upset a system at the beginning, such as that grain deal in 1970, and decide on a few reasonable outcomes, and then fill in the middle. That's the way to avoid getting lost in the forest.
Or deciding what the system is.
Pardon me?
This is Brian. Before deciding what the system is, we're getting close, I think, with the map we've created so far, but we still haven't kind of like finalized, or I mean, we keep on going off in different directions and not working with this map.
Yes, yes. A group of capable people at the edge of the forest would tend to have different opinions about how to get to the other side.
And and perceptive people will stand in front of the forest and discuss options until the forest burns down. So, sorry.
If I may make a comment here, I sort of agree with Franco. This is not an easy tool to communicate to certainly the audiences that I'm working with, for example. And I'm using PowerPoint to create great storylines and present. I think the power of this tool here is to think through systems connections which reveal the story. You explore and make yourself conscious of the systemic connections which you may be aware of, but you haven't expressed them and you haven't structured it. You haven't structured your thinking. So I think that's the power of this tool here. But then how to communicate this story out to various audiences may still require a translation into PowerPoint.
And Klaus, I agree with you that this particular context is for a particular audience, not well suited for all audiences. So, I mean, you know, depending upon which aspect of the message you're trying to communicate to who or whom, there might be several different vehicles that one would put together to communicate that particular message. Presently, I'm trying or intent on trying to figure out how to enable someone who wants to contribute to this context, how they navigate in the jungle.
Yeah,
Now,
sure.
this unfolding that's here, I found out that I can do this in two different ways, because if I take this, if I say multiple equals true, and save this, what happens is that allows you to say 1, 2, 3, 4. It allows you to sort of build the whole map piece by piece. and I, there might be times when I would want to do that, and then there are times when I'd prefer it to be just one.
So I think we have introduced another what's the word, concept here, which is the type of audience that these charts should be addressed to. Because if we are aiming at creating something that almost anybody can understand, with the help of whatever technique can be developed, it's one thing. If we think that these models are intended only for a certain type of audience, then it's another story. It's like any form of presentation. If you present some slides in PowerPoint or whatever to a group of brain surgeons, of course you need to know something about what the brain is and so on, right? So the type of audience is something that we should discuss, because if we want to get to a point where anybody can understand what the map is about, of course we have to keep this into due account. It's like using words that are not understood by everybody. You would lose the audience immediately if you start using terms. For example, if I were to quote anything in Latin or Greek, I would probably make you all fall asleep immediately, right? Or if you were to do the same using a language that I don't understand. So the audience concept, I think, is really important from the point of view of how the model should be built and presented and read.
And I agree with that. At the moment, we are the current audience, and I'm not sure that we collectively understand how to interact with the current level of detail and determine the manner in which we should continue to evolve it without thinking about, in other words, and for a different audience, it's a different presentation. The question is, how do we continue to evolve this set of relationships in a manner that, okay.
So the first test is this model good for all of us, 5 or 6 of us for the time being, and then we may expand. Is that what you've said? I mean, I think I agree with you. I think that not all of us have the same level of understanding of what we're looking at right now, right?
Well,
I think for various reasons, also because of the fact that some have spent more time than me, for example, right? So, the more you start, the more time you dedicate to something, hopefully the more you understand what you're looking at. So there are lots of factors that contribute to the level of understanding of what we are looking at.
Right, and at the moment, since I opened this, there are 5 updates to this that were done by somebody else. And at the moment, I'm not behind on issues, but when I opened it this morning, I think it said there were 15 updates to issues that I hadn't read yet that were done by other people, which means even for me, it's hard. I did learn that if I go to issues and I'm looking at this particular issue, to my mind, which was done by Brian. If I click here, it will actually take me to that piece, which is helpful. If I select it, then it shows me, I can look at what it's connected to. So I got a context for the comment, but which to me was helpful going back and forth, because if I simply look up shift value system, do I remember where this was in the model when I'm reading the comment? If I didn't go from the comment to get here. I mean, it's one thing to start here and say, okay, let me go to that particular comment. So I knew how I got here. But if I'm working through this list and I got 15 sets of discussion threads that I have to catch up on, and I look at this and I realize that, oh, okay, this has to do with product classifications, and it's not actually directly related to an element on the map because there's no link in here. So this was something that I just came to understand a couple of days ago, which was good to know, which is something that I need to build into the videos that I'm creating about how to come across one of these projects and actually understand the extent to which it's been developed and how to contribute to it going forward.
Hi, Ishara. I think that we all use, let's say, we are used to use a heuristic, a tree structure, like Mind Manager, to express a problem. And if we can here also make like a tree structure, I think by probably changing the color of each item to pinpoint, let's say, the most important items, then the one which are less. Like if you were working in a tree structure, probably it will help to figure out when we look at the map. I don't know.
Are you? Go ahead.
Yes, this is my idea. If because we are probably used to something like Mind Manager, like a tree structure where we dig down to find when we want to find a certain idea, we dig down. And here also, if we can, because I like it very much, especially now when you pinpoint to, let's say, an idea and then where it is in the map, things that you cannot do in PowerPoint. But probably what is missing here is to have the main ideas pinpointed more than the less important ideas, to make a tree structure also visible in the map, probably by changing, let's say, the character height, or by changing also the color. No, I don't know. You have to find.
May I say something about this topic?
Yes.
It happens that hierarchical structures, are part of my profession, and hierarchical structures, or tree structures, as Bechara called them, have a characteristic common to all of them, which is the number of levels, right? For example, in one of my most important tools, which is called the work breakdown structure, which is a way of breaking down any project into different level of details. The highest level is the project itself, and the more you go down, the deeper you go down, the more detailed the information about the project is. But I think that the type of maps we are looking at are based on a different principle, which is it's not easy to identify what is more important than, sorry, which element is more important than others. That is about the strength or the weight of an element, right? Rather than the name or the font of the element itself, right? If we were, let's assume that we change the font size or color of some of the elements, right? With which criteria would we make an element bigger or red rather than green? It would imply that we classify the elements according to some rules, right?
Right.
So can anybody think of anything on the map that we are looking at that is the most important thing of the elements that we're looking at? I wouldn't be able to even suggest which element is more important than others, because the key characteristic of this type of chart is that there are relationships amongst elements, right?
I agree with Franco.
So if I may offer a perspective from my background and what I've been working on for the last few years, the single most critical element of shifting into a regenerative organic food system is climate change. Currently, farmland is highly degraded. Already, over 1/3 of topsoil has been washed out because of industrial farming methods. Water tables are being depleted because of irrigation and because the soil is unable to hold water. And then you have the topsoil that is dead of microorganisms. It becomes sand, basically. It washes into the springs, washes into the oceans. So if I may elaborate in a nutshell, we have, based on the IPCC standards, a task to reduce our emissions output by 40 to 50% by 2030, and down to net zero by 2050. There's no way this can be achieved. It's simply not possible. When you think about how many power plants and cars and planes and so you would have to take out of commission. The only option we really have is to then go minus and sequester soil out of the atmosphere in form of gigatons of soil. And the only practical way to do that is through photosynthesis. And that recognition is slowly merging into mainstream thinking, and it's already expressed with the Green New Deal and with Sanders and Warren proposing presidential candidates making proposals that include regenerative agriculture and land use management and agroforestry. So to me, that is the overarching importance. Then the question is, how do you get this farm world, this agricultural world to shift, which is a highly vertically integrated system that is extremely rigid in the way that it has been structured over the last 30, 40 years. How do you open up the supply chains, the logistics systems, and so on, to connect consumer with producer, when in the middle, the entire logistics system is controlled by vertically integrated corporate structures? So that's what I've been working on, and with the Sierra Club, with the Sunrise Movement, and so on. So I'm on working with these groups on achieving that. So the action obviously starts at the local level. In fact, the Sierra Club just asked me to develop a roadmap. How can we engage our chapters at the local level to to engage and start pushing the market into a different direction. And so this is an interesting perspective to see what exactly constitutes, a local system. How localized can it be in a practical way? Because clearly there is no such thing as isolating a local community. It will have to always be integrated into a larger system structure. And so how do you build that up from the ground on up? Then of course you have all these other factors. You have the factor that the population is extremely sick. There are over 50% of the American population have diabetes or heart disease or obesity issues and so on, and basically killing off the healthcare system. So there are other factors that in and by itself would make sense to change out the food system. But to me, the overarching thing is climate change.
Okay, so in terms of this particular project, the focal point is the issue that we endeavored to understand to start with, which was local sustainable food system. We then developed a number of loops that actually contain that element. Maybe there's only one loop that contains it. That would be bizarre, wouldn't it? And the manner, in other words, once we establish a whole set of loop structures, the way that you unfold the story is the way that it's considered to be meaningful and important to convey the understanding to other people, so that we start with the local sustainable food system, and maybe when you present it to someone else, you actually unfold these individual pieces piece by piece rather than showing them the loop. And then you then show them additional connections, though in certain instances, I have not shown people the entire project because for them it's not relevant. So that I'm talking about in terms of what are the aspects of education that are important, so that, sorry, that's not where I wanted to go. If I talk about education, and then talk about the things that influence education, I can talk about this set of relationships as opposed to having to talk about the entire project. And if someone says, well, okay, what else is associated with public awareness? The nice thing about this environment is that I can go ahead and expand these relationships piece by piece based upon the way that I want to move out in the relationships. And if I hold the shift key, I can completely change the focus of what it is that I'm looking at, so I can walk through this spider web looking at individual elements and the relationships to that particular element without having to get completely lost in the entire project, unless I in fact want to, and I can continue to expand it out till it encompasses pretty much everything. Though that's part of the understanding that needs to be conveyed to someone else, so that they don't just come here and say, oh my God, let me go somewhere else. Because as a complete set of relationships, it's like trying to swallow an elephant in one bite. You just can't do that. But I'm trying to figure out how to add dimensions to it so that someone can navigate around in the environment. There are additional descriptions that need to be added to the loop labels The individual element descriptions are evolving nicely for lots of them. So I think in a difficult situation, we're continuing to evolve it to some extent. It's not done. Models are only done when you don't care about them anymore. Thoughts?
So let's go back to the initial question. So our project is called Rural Community Food System, right? And we are trying to describe, by means of this diagram, what elements have some kind of impact on the rural community food system, right?
The current established rural community food system as it currently operates, as opposed to the way we would like it to operate in the future better. Okay?
Right. So the as is, right? As we said the other time, this is the as is situation of the rural community food system. So the ultimate objective, you know, this map would be classified successful and good if whoever looks at it in whatever way understands what currently a rural community food system looks like. What it is influenced by, what it is characterized by, right? This is the ultimate objective. Right? So we said that one way to read, to unfold this map is to go through those dots at the bottom of the screen and either display them one by one or in a cumulative manner, so that becomes more and more comprehensive rather than analyzing each single dot. I'm just thinking loud.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So if we go back to the storytelling art, if you want, if I go back to the analogy of the theater or film that you have raised many times, Gene, if you don't tell the story in the right sequence, it's a catastrophe, right? If chapter 2 of a thriller tells you who the killer is, and then chapter 3 follows number 1, if you read about the killer in chapter 2, you may as well throw the thriller away because you've already know the end of the story, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the way in which the chart is unfolded is essential. It's not an option. If you go from 1 to 2 to 3, assuming that this is the right sequence, is fine, is okay. If you go 1, 4, 5, 7, 10, 3, and 4, the story will not be understood, and the audience will go somewhere else.
Right.
So what is the question then? The way in which it is unfolded, so the method, either cumulative or bit by bit, because this is a substantial difference, right? If you switch each element of the chart on bit by bit, you have a small number of elements on the screen, which is easier to digest. Whereas if you keep adding the second element to the first, the third element to the first and the second, and so on, you end up by reaching dot number 9, and you've almost got the whole picture in front of you, and by that time you're probably lost, right? So I think one aspect we should talk about is how to unfold, how to tell the story, if you agree.
Right, and my personal experience is that my initial impressions on how to unfold the story for a particular project have evolved over time as I developed a better understanding of the set of relationships. In other words, I would develop, something as simple as The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I have probably unfolded that story in at least 3 different ways. And it's just one simple story with 3 loops in it, though I have presented it different ways for different emphasis. Whether the emphasis was on the boy and the boy's understanding, or the townspeople and their understanding or lack of understanding. And I even presented it from the wolf's perspective one day, just to be different. And so that it depends upon the story you want to tell for which audience. So
this is very interesting.
The set of relationships are what they are. The question that you surfaced appropriately is, how do you then take that set of relationships and unfold it in a manner that is likely to be understood by the audience you want to convey some level of understanding to? And that order might be different for different audiences. I know that there are lots of stories, there are lots of movies that you watch where they tell you this little story and then this little story and then this little story, and a half hour later they connect them together so you understand why they told you these little stories to begin with. I mean, if you watch the movie Armageddon, it's really good at that. There are like 4 individual small stories at the beginning that get connected later because of the people are all of the individual stories all come together to solve the problem overall. So one might present this as a small story, and this is a small story, and this is a small story, and then when you finally get to here, it weaves them all together.
Well, this is very interesting. What you've just said is very interesting. You know, different ways of unfolding the same story. That doesn't work for all types of stories or books, right? Because a book usually, you know, is read.
It has a particular intent, right?
You've got chapter 1, 2, and 3, and you usually read 1 and then 2 and then 3, right? Not 1, 3, 2.
Well, unless it's one of those books that has multiple alternative endings, that depends upon how you work your way through the book.
Well, I'm talking about traditional, you know, novels and not textbooks, or, you know, there are manuals that you can read at random. But I'm talking about, you know, traditional books that you go through them one chapter after the other. So what you've just said, which is, I understood, different ways of unfolding the same story, is very, very interesting, because what would determine the choice between the first, the second, and the third way of telling the same story? Is it suppose characteristics of the audience? Some characteristics.
Right. Suppose I'm presenting to large farmers, or I'm presenting to point of sale grocery stores, or I'm presenting to small family farms. I would think that the emphasis would be different to different groups of people. There would be certain aspects of the set of relationships that they could care less about.
Okay, right. So it's the type of audience that determines what type of unfolding.
I don't know if you can hear me. This is Bob.
Hi, Bob. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was no excuses. Just here I am. But I love what you two are talking about, and Franco, the idea. Yes, I think there is the story does have to have a chronological understanding, but I think what we're talking about here, excuse the term, but we're talking about block universes, where we're saying that image represents not static, but a dynamic informational thing. And then Gene has the ability to oscillate between multiple stories that he's used the same diagram for. And so that complexity the illusion that that is it all is part of a continuum of time. So yes, it does matter on how we tell the story, but you can give the answer to who killed the person at the beginning if you frame it in the right way, that is important.
That lots of people do that. They say they show you the murder and then they show you 36 hours before.
But that becomes the power of the story, of how you're framing it to the other people's stories that you already know, or you're trying to create.
It's much akin, if you consider the state of Kentucky. You could look at the road system for Kentucky. You could look at the waterways. You could look at a topographical map. You could look at temperature variations across the state. It's still the state of Kentucky, but you're looking at it in several different ways for different reasons.
Right, and that map is static. It has, and if we move it in time, there's going to be tension on it. So right, that it's always how you're framing the story and integrating it to the audience.
Okay, so we have made one step forward, which is this map can be described. The story of this map can be unfolded in many different ways, depending on the audience and maybe on the circumstances. Correct?
Though the way that you choose to unfold it doesn't actually change what it is.
No, but
I mean, the set of relationships. We develop the set of relationships based upon what we consider to be meaningful and appropriate as those things that are relevant, and then depending upon what we want to do with it or whom we want to do it to, I guess, sort of gives us guidance as to what aspects of it to use in what way. I mean, one of my realizations is that historically we have developed a relationship map and we have inflicted it on all communities in the same way, irregardless of what are different. What Sengi said in the fifth discipline, which is so marvelous. We become what we do. All right, we are map makers, so we believe everybody should appreciate maps the way we do, and they don't, and they never will, and we shouldn't expect them to.
Well, and I would say that the map does not stay the same, because when the person learns that map is like that, could transformation change his perception on how he should act, which would feed back to change the map on how it's operating.
The set of relationships should evolve based upon understanding where appropriate. I mean, but we talked. I think that you may have arrived after we had an initial conversation about the intent here is to create the map of the set of relationships as they are at the moment, and then we will think about the way that the relationships ought to be altered to produce the environment that, as we think it might be better in the future. And at the moment, we think that some aspects of this map are likely to be confusing the current with the future.
Okay, no, sorry, didn't mean to jump in there.
Well, that's okay. I noticed when all of a sudden it said that you showed up.
Yep. Good.
If I may bring in another consideration, because we are doing exactly what you're describing here for citizen climate lobby and business climate leaders. Their task is to promote a carbon fee and dividend program. So I've developed a series of PowerPoints for them that lays out the storyline and that why we need to reduce carbon emissions and why this tax is the best way forward. So this presentation has been customized to be for a generic audience. So for example, I did this to the League of Women Voters, groups that have nothing per se to do with the industry. And that was an entirely different perspective than doing it to agriculture. We just developed one for seafood operators for the seafood industry, which again have a different perspective on what is carbon pollution and how does it impact the seafood industry. But so it's the same core element of information we're trying to get across to different audiences, emphasizing different points of how carbon impacts the environment in their particular business.
And as I talked about the Hawaii quality of life model, in that this particular model was done in a great level of detail and that abstracted for an audience that wasn't willing or probably interested in getting into the same level of detail, so that each one of these elements is in fact a more detailed loop of some set of interactions rather than having it all on the same model. But to be able to do that, you first have to develop the set of relations that you can figure out how to abstract into a less dense set of interactions, I guess. Now, if I can find it, if you give me a moment, story. Beautiful storytelling. This is storytelling. Yeah, this. Okay, this. So this was developed by a couple of people, by Andrew and Jenny, and it was very nicely done. So I redid it in Kumu because I really liked the way that it was developed. And I then said, well, maybe I can abstract this to create a loop for every loop that's in the project. And it ended up that the loop or the model that I created was just as complex as the one I started from. So it didn't simplify it at all. But in the process of doing this, there was a realization that happened, an aha moment, that this whole set of stuff is actually three shifting the burden structures, so that this aspect of it is this loop. This whole aspect of it is this loop, and this whole aspect of it is this loop. And lo and behold, there's actually two real relationships that don't even show up in this project or up in this model. But it was, in fact, working and reworking this to come to a realization that the whole thing distills down to accommodate births, avoid births, and avoid pregnancy. And that's what all of these relationships say in more detail. And it's easier to present this to someone, and when they say, well, what do you mean accommodate births? Well, here's the way that you do the accommodation. If you want to talk about avoiding births, here's the way that you go about doing the avoidance. And to avoid pregnancy, here are a set of relationships about avoiding pregnancy. Does that help? Make sense?
The overarching point of that model is dealing with abortion. Is that correct?
No, it wasn't actually about abortion. It was about, in other words, I think it was actually about unwanted pregnancy. So if you avoid the pregnancy, you don't have to worry about abortion.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, my point was just that there has to be a certain hierarchy, I would suggest, in how in the aim of the system. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, if for example, in actual consider climate change mitigation and resilience building as the overarching aim of the system, then consequently it requires a decentralization of the current system, requires regional and local communities to build up their system. So it sort of falls into the steps that will have to be taken to achieve the overall aim.
And it depends upon, I think, whose perspective you're considering.
So I'm looking at this from a policy perspective.
Whose policy?
I'm working with NGO. For example, the Green New Deal is one of the entities engaged here. Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club, and so on.
Right.
The aim is to influence policy at the national level.
Right. So your perspective is very different than an industrial farmer's perspective.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And it's good to keep in mind that each of us approaches the situation from some perspective that might actually be unique, though it's likely to be different than other people with different backgrounds who operate in different contexts. So that my perspective, your perspective, and the industrial farmer's perspective is probably very different than the big box grocery store people.
Gene, in that mapping, is there any accounting for, like Klaus was saying, of hierarchy, any policy or hierarchy of time, of the scale of time of those different loops and interactions?
Well, it all exists at once. I mean, given a point in time, all of those relationships are there. Usually the way that it has made sense for me to tell stories as how things sort of would unfold time-wise, from the first point being the more important or the more central focus, and then from that, what is likely to be relevant is something that interacts with that. So that the way that the story unfolds is, it ends up being linear because you have to talk about one word after another. It's hard to get out of that frame, though you would sense that the core piece is just that. It's the central focus of the story, which contains the situation that you're really trying to understand, and then work outward from there.
Right. Yeah. Because but it would have to be framed in a certain frame of time, particularly if you're writing policy for that idea. I mean, so yeah, it does fit into how that contextualization of the story is what scale some of those loops are in as far as time.
Okay. And as I said, I often have to do it. And, I did a presentation 2 weeks ago for somebody off of 3 different models. And it didn't go very well. And between the last 2 weeks, I have reworked the presentation 4 times. And this morning I did another video of the same content and sent it to them. And I'm still not happy with it. And it's the same set of stuff, simply unfolded in a different way that I think makes more sense than it did 2 days ago. So I think my point is we continue to interact this was the question to begin with, local sustainable food system. And then we ask ourselves, what are the relationships that are relevant in considering that? And once we ferret out this set of relationships, how do we make sense of them in a way that someone else might be able to follow who wasn't here for the 100 hours that we spent thinking through the pieces? It's sort of trying to figure out how to do a time compression for other people. In the midst of all of these relationships, someplace there's an insight, or maybe a couple. And the thing that I loved about the Heath Brothers' last book is the way that you get other people to understand things really is you enable them to trip over them, so that you take a clear insight and you compress it in time and deliver it in a way that allows them to have an aha moment. So rather than trying to tell them something, you allow them to sort of experience something that gives them, it sort of takes them to someplace they didn't expect to be.
Uh-huh.
Which is far easier, I've found it's far easier to say than to do. Right? Though I think it's worth continuing to work on. That's my long-term phrasing of, I spend most of my time being clueless.
Well, I recently sent out 2 articles hoping that some people will trip over it and have them reframe their information of their duration of time, which is the same kind of thing. I like your analogy there of you couldn't explain some of the 2 articles. You'd have to read them, and then maybe someone might just have a blank look, or they might say, aha. And I don't know how else I would use those articles to do that. So I like the analogy of putting someone in a space where they have to trip over it.
Mm. Send me a video I can watch at 1.5 speed to shorten
exactly. Yeah, you don't want to read the articles. I know. I would have to prime.
Well, yeah, there are at least 3 or 4 people a week send me an email saying you got to read this book. You know?
I know.
And then the next 15 lifetimes I might get to them. So the first thing I do is I go to YouTube and search for the author and find 2 or 3 videos that they have done that are like 10 or 15 minutes long, and then I'll watch them at 1.5 speed. And it usually gives me pretty much of what the book was about.
Oh, okay, I can do that. Yep. Yep.
And I suggest that most people watch my videos at 1.5 speed too, because they're kind of dry. Well, okay, we've been at this for like, I don't know, an hour and 10 minutes so far today. Additional questions or points that people would like to offer before we sort of go wrestle with this some more on our own, alone, and then have another session?
Shall we try to summarize any type of confusion or conclusion that we have reached during this hour and something? Have we made any step forward, or are we still in the fog?
Oh, well,
we're always in the fog.
I'm forever in the fog.
Yeah.
I personally, in the last few days, have made some progress in the way that the model itself is structured from a mechanics perspective in the background, which will probably make a bit more sense to the rest of you as soon as I do the videos. And so that now that I have sort of I think I got that sorted out, I need to spend some time with this model in an attempt to go through it in a way that I think I want the video to be presented, and see if it actually hangs together. And then when you watch the video, you can tell me whether or not it hangs together.
Brian, could you, you have spent a lot of time on the model, changed a number of articles. What are your thoughts, I mean, from this conversation here?
I mean, like I said at the beginning, I think that there are some structural things with the model. For example, Gene's shown R2 a couple of times. R2 is not a loop anymore, at least not the one he's showing there. I broke it. Okay, I'm sorry, I broke the model, guys. And so when I was told that I should make the changes unilaterally, and I did that. And now I've got a broken model. And we got to kind of figure out, well, I suggested a new O2R, you know, maybe that would work. But we got to take a look at these things. Also, with the policy awareness, that is not a loop. You have two connections going, meeting each other. Loop can only go in one direction. So we need to take a look at that as well. And R3, I don't understand R3. I mean, I got it down there, but I really do not understand how that R3 is supposed to work. So all those other things need to be taken a look at too. Those are very basic mapping structural issues, and they're not really important to the policies we're talking about, but as far as doing good maps, they are important, and that's what I was trying to focus on over the last few days. There are philosophical issues too we can go in later on. But I think those things need to have somebody take a look at it. I mean, do our element definitions make sense to everybody? I mean, I know you and I have made a lot of, you know, additions to defining things and trying to come up with ideas and so forth like that. I mean, other people maybe want to come in and contribute or try to take a look and say, well, at least I agree with what you're saying. No, I think Claus is right. You're wrong, Brian, whatever it happens to be. So all those things I'm still wondering about.
How about the hierarchy? What were your thoughts?
I'm not ready for hierarchy yet. I mean, right now for me, it's the system. I'm trying to understand. I'm putting everything equal and seeing how they relate together, and then see what emerges out of that. I do think looking at building these loops together that there is. I recently saw an article. Let me just go back here if I can find this again. Where is it? It's the. Oh, come on, Brian. You go take this. Please. The Information System in Theory project defines a system as a set of mutually constrained events. Now, I like that definition, okay? And I'm trying to see how all these elements together constrain together to create the kind of loops or persistent causality to make up this of being a system. I'm not at a hierarchy level yet.
Okay. And I'm happy that you broke it. I mean, don't worry about breaking it.
Oh, I'm not worried. I like breaking things.
Okay, good. And then, you know, in terms of the new one that you defined, I think there's actually a loop there.
Yeah, there is. You can get rid of the original one if you want to, and just.
I probably will, but I had to spend a few minutes and figure out where the new one really was, and the problem is I keep connecting with the comment as opposed to with the loop. I fixed it. It might not be right, but I fixed it. That's really a loop.
Yeah. Assuming I did it right.
So, and part of one of the videos I have to do is how to fix loops, okay? Which is, you know, not a difficult undertaking, but someone has to walk through it. And so you select the loop and you select the pencil, and then you put things in and take them out of the loop, and then you save it, and that's it.
Was that definition richly constrained events?
Now, hold on, let me get back to it again. For a second. Information Systems Theory Project, ISTP, defines a system as a set of mutually constrained events.
Events. Okay, so yeah, so events are in a moment of time. So
Yes.
okay, yeah, and so there is a hierarchy there.
Which would be what?
Time.
Time.
They're not all happening at the same time. And so back to Klaus's saying about the chronological order becomes very important because some of the sets or events may not even exist if you frame it in a certain way. So you would have to frame that within your story that, oh, this event's going to happen later, even though I'm showing it on the map as happening right now. Yeah, so the scale of time becomes an important component of that map.
I would agree. But it's sort of above or beneath or somewhere, but it's not explicit on the map itself.
Just in the story. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So are we meeting on Thursday?
Let me check my schedule. We can meet on Thursday if some or all of you would like. Can we? I mean, it would probably be good to ponder this and have another meeting close in time to this meeting as opposed to waiting 2 weeks for us to all forget about what we talked about today.
I won't be able to make it this coming Thursday.
I think I can. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I can.
Well, I'll send out the invitation, and if only one person signs up, then we won't have the meeting, and we'll have it like next Tuesday. Okay. Okay. Thank you all for hanging in there. There's about 2, 4, 6, about 7 or 8 people that are still hanging in there out of like 22 or so to start with. So the people that show up are the ones that matter, right? 90% of life is showing up.
That's
okay.
True.
Okay.
Take care, all. Have a good day. Bye.
So,
Bye. Bye, everybody.